My name is Clare O'Keeffe and I facilitate difficult conversations. And with Embrace Farm, if there's a tragedy, an accident, a bereavement, a loss, there can be a very, very difficult conversation required in planning what would they like to do into the future, perhaps without the main person who traditionally stabilised the entire farm business and family. Well, succession is a process, and we generally don't realise that we may suddenly be at the end of that process until something tragically happens. So embracing that process and having a conversation, or many conversations, which include succession, it's a lifelong journey. And the succession conversation and the succession planning, of course it can be deferred because it's not seen as a priority until something happens and it becomes a priority. So we endeavour to bring that conversation into normal life and into a place where it's safe and it's okay to talk about succession. It might not be needed immediately, but that those involved in the farm and in the family, they know what the succession process will look like and when eventually succession will take place. The most important reason to have a succession plan in place, it really gives peace of mind. And when there's peace in their mind, there can be peace in your heart. And so often I would meet people and they say, you know, we don't know where to start. We don't have a succession plan. We're mulling around and wondering. So starting by writing a will, that allows one to focus on a succession plan if it comes down to reading it through a will. But having a succession plan in place, it may be required prematurely for some people, but that others in the family know what the plan is, know what people discussed and how people were included in that succession planning process. It brings peace of mind, and it does help when families may fall apart due to a loss, but it does help if they know what was discussed and what was hoped for the future. Sometimes a farm family or a member of the farming community doesn't have a farm succession plan in place or any plan in place, and they're living from day to day. And if something goes wrong in that case, as in something going wrong being their health, or there's an accident or something happens and nobody knows what their intentions were, that can be an additional sadness and grief for the entire family and the community, because it may be a wonderful individual. Some may feel in the community, oh, they know what this person wanted, they know what would be right, but how do we know when the person is no longer with us? So it is so important to have a plan in place if you own assets, so there can be harmony when a time of grief or tragedy unfolds. At least there's peace and families know the next step. They know what the intention was because it may have been discussed and documented. Well, as a succession facilitator, we facilitate where the family are at when we meet with them. If Embrace Farm suggests that we may be able to facilitate a conversation with the family or with the grieving family or the family who are at loss because somebody has either died or has had a serious accident. So what can we do? We listen and we just hold that space for them to tease out where they're at, knowing where the ownership of the assets lie, who actually owns what. Ownership may not have even transferred from a previous generation. So it really is a team. There may be legal expertise required, an accountant's influence and their role, the tax planner's contribution will be required, and we facilitate that difficult conversation, allowing the space for people to reflect back and then to plan forward. But it is a process that takes time, and if you add the layer of grief and loss onto that, it does take time, and time can be months, even years, not just immediate weeks and days, allowing time and space for a family to plan and to tweak, and they may go back into grieving for a good while before they can look ahead again. but giving time with respect to putting a plan in place that's workable. If we are contacted by somebody whom Embrace Farm has suggested we could perhaps help them, we endeavour to try to meet with them face to face when they're ready, following an initial phone call. And when I say they, it may be one individual or it may be members of a family. It may be parents who've lost a son or daughter, or it may be adult children who've lost a sibling who was to be the potential successor. There can be any number of people involved in those conversations. We generally start with whomever is in a place to communicate directly with us, and we listen to the lead up of the day or the night or the evening that changed everything in their lives. We listen again as they outline that day, which they remember very, very vividly, how it all unfolded and the consequences of that. Generally, the local community are really, really helpful initially. For example, if it's a farming family, somebody will fall in and help to milk cows, clean yards, feed cattle, move fencing, give silage, do all of the practical things. But after a while, the neighbours have to return to their own homesteads and their own farms. Slowly, people have to move back and leave the family alone. And that's when we are generally asked to come on board by Embrace Farm, because a plan has to be put in place for the next season and the next year, because grass will continue to grow. But it needs to be managed by somebody who's capable of picking up the reins again. When Embrace Farm contact us, we ask if there's a very brief history on the family and how close to the tragedy are we time-wise. Is it months? Is it years? And I had a case where it actually was on the 10th anniversary of the loss that I was able to help that family. So for 10 years, they had found their own way of working through it, but all of the emotional pain which they were carrying actually influenced and shrouded the best type of a succession plan for that business. But it was on just after the 10th anniversary that we were actually able to formulate a workable succession plan. So it's difficult to say when is the best time, but when people are ready. And we might be there for a period of time, for one meeting, perhaps for 3 hours, and we may not meet them again for another, could be 6 months, or it could be a year or two. So each case is different, as each loss is different, and the pain of grief is different for everyone. Embrace Farm is making a very, very real impact, very quietly, very gently, very respectfully, with farming families in Ireland. And it's not until you actually need the service that you realise the value of all of the interwoven supports that Embrace Farm offer to farming families. Sometimes I may make a call if I'm asked to speak with a farming family, and then I may step back because maybe another service is required at that juncture. So the services that a farming family required, initially they may not know what exactly they need next, but we're all interconnected and interwoven, and it is with great respect that we step back or step in as a family requires us. And it's a very beautiful space and a privilege just to be with a family who are sharing that loss, to look ahead, remembering the past, but to look ahead and to make the next right step in the process for them, for the family and for the farming business, and for them and their identity in the community. You know, they've gone through some trauma, some tragedy that only that family has really experienced firsthand. But it can be intergenerational. There can be grandparents, and there can be grandchildren. There can be many, many members of the family affected by the loss or the grief or the tragedy or the accident, and allowing each the space to share their story, but yet moving forward if there is a farm business that needs to be managed, and putting a succession plan in place that the business can proceed and progress. So that's our role in teasing out from an agricultural perspective what's the best plan, short-term and long-term, for this farming family. On a day when everything is going well, just take a moment that if this were to change, what would you really like to have in place if you were not in a position to make the decision? So while you can, just make a decision that others are aware of. Maybe formalise it, maybe legalise it, put it in place, discuss it with your family so that others know this is actually what was discussed, this is what was planned, and we actually have it formalised, we have it on paper, we have it legalised now. Whether it is transferring assets or at least discussing what it will look like into the future. And it's never too early to start a succession discussion. Wills are read when an individual dies. We all hope that that will be sometime way off into the future when we're very, very, very elderly and we've our life's work completed and we will leave the minimum of assets in our will. A succession plan is when you're alive. It is what will happen tomorrow, 6 months' time, a year's time, 6 years' time, so that your family actually know, and your spouse, your partner, your children will know, if something should happen now, we actually know what the plan is. We know what was discussed. We know who's to take responsibility for what. And a succession plan will keep evolving. We generally start out with life with very, very little. We endeavour to accumulate assets, and then a time comes when we need to transfer them and let them go again and have very, very little when our time comes. But if we still own a lot of assets at the end of our days, those assets will be distributed through whatever the directions of our will state. Embrace Farm are compiling a new booklet, and I was privileged to be asked to contribute a little piece on our services and how we perhaps can help some families who may need some succession planning guidance going forward. But each family is different, each tragedy is different, so taking each case as it is and giving people the space and time. I hope we've identified that in that when you read it in the booklet, that you will see your loss and your grief, the change to your lives is unique to you. And nobody has the monopoly on grief. The pain you carry is part of your life's journey. And perhaps it will be because of that that you may have had to make changes, and that there will be a positive outcome in some way into the future because of that transition that came prematurely. But maybe we can be part of, it's like being along a train track in parallel with you. So while you're planning slowly your journey, that we're there to support you until we get to the next junction. And maybe we need to take a break. Sometimes we need to take a break along the way, and the stations and the stops might be quite frequent. And then there might be a longer journey together for a period of time. But as part of that booklet, our services are there in the background.
Embrace Farm has created a number of resources offering a range of practical information that might be needed in the aftermath of a serious injury or sudden death, such as succession planning, legal and financial mentoring. If you or someone you know has been affected by a serious injury or sudden death within a farm family, reach out to us and we will support you in whatever way you need.